On this episode of AV Week, Commercial Integrator is co-locating a Pro AV show with CEDIA Expo in 2023. What can we in the commercial industry learn from the residential market? And DEI in AV.
We can't say the future without AI. I mean, there's no way around it. 50% of workers now believe AI is going to improve their experience. When I come into the meeting room, I need a way to incorporate my AI with what's going on in the meeting. It's almost a bring your own AI type of a concept. Most of what we do in our day-to-day is going to change significantly.
Hear the latest AV trends and predictions in this episode of Crestron's Smarter Spaces podcast on your preferred podcast platform.
All that and more next on AV Week.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is AV Week, episode 580, recorded Friday, September 30th, 2022. Blurred Lines.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Crestron and by
Peerless AV, driving technology through innovation.
This is AV Week, your weekly wrap-up of audiovisual news and information. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us to discuss the news and information we have gathered this week, first and foremost, Amala Reddie from Commercial Integrator. Welcome, madam.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Also with us is Mr. Paul Dexter from JetBuilt. Welcome, sir.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me back. Huge pleasure.
And a young man I got to meet through mutual friend Charmaine Torella. His name is Fernando Mora, and Fernando works at the 9/11 Museum. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Fernando, fantastic to actually finally have you on. Thank you to Charmaine for connecting us. Fernando does some really, really interesting things, and obviously at a very unique and special place there in New York City. So glad to have you on.
Thanks for having me on. I've been a long-time listener, so good to finally be on.
Absolutely, man. Happy to have you. So as the old joke goes, I just flew in from Dallas, and boy, are my arms tired. Quite literally, we're recording this on September 30th, and I really did fly in this morning from Dallas. I got to see Amala's co-worker, Mr. Farizi from Commercial Integrator. We'll talk about that in a second, but CEDIA Expo 2022 happened this week in Dallas. A number of unique releases. 90% of them is going into somebody's home in some way, shape, or form. That is what CEDIA Expo is all about. However, there are increasingly more and more companies that serve both the residential industry and the commercial industry, commercial side of AV. In addition to that, a number of technologies have either started or gotten deeper evolution inside the home. Paul, I'm going to start with you. JetBuilt was there. You're one of the companies that was both at Infocom and at CEDIA Expo. What do you think we can learn? What do you think the pro side of the industry and the customers of the pro side of the industry can learn from CEDIA Expo and the releases there?
Boy, yeah, I was hoping you're going to ask me last because
you were the only one of us that have a booth at both, right?
Well, yeah, but we serve two sets of customers, right? So we serve commercial integrators, we serve residential integrators, and I do agree that there's some converging happening. There's clearly integrators, a certain subset of our users that serve both sides. And several small integrators and several large integrators serve both sides. But it's funny because, I come from commercial AV myself. And so I didn't start going to CEDIA until JetBuilt, which serves both markets. Yeah. And so I've always heard these stories of what one side thinks of the other. You know, there's a lot of, it's no different than an electrician who's a commercial or a residential, right? There's some friction, you know, the rules are different, the permits are different, and some people think one's better than the other. To me, it's just different batches of gear. It's fun stuff for the home versus stuff for work or stuff for like a fine arts theater, things like I used to work in. But your question of what can the commercial side learn from the CEDIA channel, that one was just tricky for me. I not to say there's not things to learn from that channel. It's just I think, and I don't want to say anything to offend anybody, but it seems like the CEDIA channel, because it's a residential market that is less understood, there's less big companies in it. I don't mean the manufacturers, but the integrators, that they've followed a lot of the Infocom, the AVWeek channel, right? They've tried to model a lot of what the commercial companies do, which is not the fair model. It's apples to oranges, I've felt. So that being said, there's clearly a lot to learn from the CEDIA channel. It's just a tricky question that I was hoping I'd go last.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what.
I found a way to talk about it for a minute.
No. We'll bring Amala in and see what she has to say. And if she says something that sparks your interest, we'll bring you back in. Amala, same kind of question, is what Amala was not there. Dan Farisi from CI was. But as you've gotten more and more into the industry, do you see any correlations? Do you see any threads between the two?
Yes, it's actually interesting. I really haven't been into CEDIA because I work for Commercial Integrator and CPro, which is the sister site that we have that handles CEDIA. So we have Jason Knott and Robert Archer and all those familiar names, kind of heading CEDIA. And I will admit, it's just been my first year. I'm approaching the first year mark at Commercial Integrator, so I'm very new to the whole thing. But it's interesting for me. I'm seeing the ties between commercial AV and residential AV, and I know as a consumer, and I'm not talking as a journalist here, I'm talking about myself as a consumer, how integrators are approaching technology in residential homes, especially since the pandemic. I think the lines have really started blurring. That's what I have noticed between commercial and residential. And I'll admit, the first time I joined, I had no idea what either of the markets were. But the more I'm learning about it, the more I'm seeing that there is a correlation, especially I think in conference spaces, people trying to set up home offices, and that's where the question is, right? Does commercial AV fit into the home offices? I think in one of our supplements collaboration today and tomorrow, we also discuss that a lot. There are several articles pertaining to that. So I have no answers. I just have more questions here.
Right. I'm also from the commercial world, so I'll kind of follow what Paul says. I spent my entire career in the commercial space. I've done some resi work. I mean, first of all, I would like to say I'm happy we're all back in person. That's one thing. I missed last year's Infocom, and I haven't been to CEDIA, but I understand it is mostly residential. So I don't have a ton to say about that. I know that there are some commercial integrators that would like to get into the resi space, the smaller ones, not the big ones. And some of the resi integrators also do commercial work. So there's some shops that have talents on both sides. So it's really difficult to say, well, there's some manufacturers as well, such as Crestron, Extron, and others. I know some places that they've installed NVX in a house, which is for us is like, wow, so that's quite a bit, even on boats or whatever. So there are integrators and manufacturers that do both, and for us, it's kind of a blurred line. So I've done, like I said, mostly commercial, but I've done a few homes, and to be honest with you, the ones that I personally have done, there's not a lot of difference. You're reporting to an owner for a home as opposed to maybe a consultant on the commercial side, a consultant, or maybe someone that works for the company. We find in both cases a lot where you get a scope of work, and probably a little more on the resi side, where they'll use it totally different than what they initially say. So you say, okay, ma'am, John, what would you like in this particular space? What would you want us to install? What do you envision as something that you would want? And they may not know as much as maybe on the commercial side, where you have an experienced consultant with scope of work and things like that. That it's a little more laid out to say, okay, this is specifically what we want. And if that's not the case, then there's something called a change order, which a lot of commercial integrators love to throw upon these places. But again, large homes, you might even have a consultant at that point. But those things are, for me, just a weird blurred line that there isn't, a clear answer to say X, Y, or Z.
There's something that occurred to me that I should have thought in my notes yesterday when I was thinking about this question, and I thought I didn't have anything. As a commercial integrator for many years, working only in commercial environments, maybe the projects are more structured in terms of the bidding process and the organization, maybe a consultant and so forth.
But much more structured process. You're right.
Yeah, right. But I will say one thing I learned from the CDA channel, really big, because when I build a project for commercial AV, whether it's for fine arts or a house of worship or a corporate system, there's always a technical lead that is in charge of hiring me and always in charge of me basically training them how to use the system, and they teach their people how to use it, right? And when something goes wrong, they generally know how to get it back online, fix it, whatever, right? This technical lead. Then I did a couple of residential projects, and I found out why my residential integrator friends were so special. And that is because when they commission a project, it's for people who have no idea about the technical equipment, right? They don't know the first thing about any of these boxes. All they know is the remote, and maybe a touch panel. But the point is, and there was a story, they're coming home late, probably some drinking. They lean against the touch panel, which puts it into program mode, which changes the whole system, which or like a button, and whole thing goes down, but there's no technical need to fix it. So I learned how to a little bit of a deal of I need to treat my commercial projects with that same sort of let's make everything as dummy proof as it can be and as foolproof as it can be, which is something you always want to do. But at the residential, it needs to be done at a much higher level. Because maybe they are dummies, right? If they're nothing but a family living in a home, they don't know anything about this stuff. And so I was relying on my technical lead at these commercial facilities, maybe too much. And that was one thing that I think is a good thing that all commercial integrators could learn from the CDA channel, even though it's a little bit of a weird concept.
Two things I would add to that. On the commercial side, typically small to medium, even most likely large organizations would have some sort of, like you mentioned, technical lead, AV techs on site that can actually go in and troubleshoot the situation where there's a homeowner. And a lot of these homeowners, the first thing they do is, pick up the phone. So I would suspect that would be a little bit for the resi side, that they get a lot of service calls, a lot of truck rolls.
Well, but they're prepared for it. They're built for it. This is what I'm saying. My resi,
right.
Well, my resi integrators were built for that type of situation.
So another thing that I would mention is the UX programming by the programmer, right? Whereas you have someone who's not familiar, you really have to design the touch panel page so that they could understand it a little bit better than someone in a commercial space. So maybe you have a tech and you have a tools page, and the technician can get to any part of the system behind the passcode or something like that they can actually get to and solve issues. Whereas, most programs are not going to give a homeowner a tools page unless they're somewhat tech savvy. You tend to just lock it down as much as you possibly can, so that way you don't have to, either go over there or most likely. And then another thing is, from the commercial space, you have VPN and remote access that you can get to a room and fix a problem possibly from your phone at a ballpark. Whereas some homeowners may not, and again, not from the resi space, so I'm not sure how much space or how much access a homeowner would allow, their integrator to get into their system and make changes. And that's for me one of the two big differences.
I think another point I want to add, and I'm not too sure about it, so it's more of a question, is how does the budget factor into the commercial AV and the residential AV? Because as homeowners, I know I'm not a homeowner yet. I'm still too young to have a home of my own.
Point number 3, exactly.
But when you have homeowners, you have to take into consideration their budget and the way commercial spaces are. That kind of budget is different. So how does that play into this whole space?
The whole scope of money is totally different, because if you tell commercially, you're gonna a commercial part of a commercial installation, okay, we're gonna do a complete NVX system. Well, that's going to be in the tens of thousands of dollars. Whereas someone at home, like, well, I have so many other things to spend my money on in this home. AV is up there, but it's not the most. They'd rather have a nicer kitchen, a nicer bathroom, an awesome closet, et cetera, where AV might be the husband's thing and not the wife's thing. And as we know, it's the wife that dictates these things as opposed to the men.
Yeah. Well, I do think that disparity between low budget, high budget, I think it exists on both commercial and residential. Clearly, so many of my clients were churches with such tight budgets, similar to mini homes, right? But then, and I never did an elite home, but we have, on Jet Build, a lot of our Jet Build community, they do these $1 million systems in a home. That means that house has got to be $10, $50, $100 million to do $1 million AV system. So, and then the same is true in commercial. There are also the big budgets. I think that range is kind of goes both ways. It could be big budget on both sides, but I think the decision on a home residential is always going to be far more emotional, right? Spending the money for getting something you want is more emotional, the way a person is going to buy a car or go on a vacation. In a business, it's far more business structured, right? So they're not going to, they may need to, if it's a baseball stadium, they want to outdo the other baseball stadium in the next city. So they'll get a little emotional to outdo them, the way maybe Cowboys Stadium was done 10 years ago or so. And now SoFi had to outdo them, right? So there's some emotion, but largely the business side is more decisions, more bids, and more budget.
So let's turn this corner a bit, because we do have an extended version of this story that kind of ties into all of this. One of the things that was interesting, I mean, and everybody here kind of mentioned the fact that you've got Crestron, you've got Legrand, Paul, you guys were both you were both at Infocom and CEDIA Expo. You also had Poly at CEDIA Expo this year. Zoom had a presence, not a huge booth, but it was still a presence. And they were both in the area where the IMCCA was, talking about home work, talking about the home office. And then on Wednesday, my friends at Commercial Integrator threw me a curveball. Now, Amala is a fantastic reporter. She is not a spokesperson for Commercial Integrator. So we're gonna juggle some things here a bit. But from Commercial Integrator's website, Commercial Integrator is doing they're doing a Commercial Integrator Expo, and they're going to co-locate with CEDIA Expo in 2023. From the article, quote unquote, Emerald, owners of the CEDIA Expo, has announced the launch of the Commercial Integrator Expo that will co-locate with CEDIA Expo 2023 in Denver next year. The event will bring together commercial AV products and education with the residential focus of CEDIA Expo. Now, really quickly, just some housekeeping. Emerald owns the CEDIA Expo. They also own Commercial Integrator, and they also own CE Pro. Okay, so that's where kind of this all comes together. But in my head, it was a Pro AV show within CEDIA Expo, right? An existing residential. It's a little bit like ISE, a little bit like Integrated Systems Europe, right? Where you've got both commercial and residential folks as well. We did reach out to our friends at Avixa just to get their 2 cents. Quote from Mr. Labuskets, quote unquote, the growth and resilience of the AV industry are always going to make it attractive to for-profit companies looking to enhance their bottom line and shareholder value. We believe the role that Avixa and its trade shows have played in that growth and the unique understanding of the AV marketplace that our affinity with the industry gives us as a nonprofit association will continue to make Infocom the North American event of choice for our industry and the community it serves. So, Paul, as somebody who has exhibited at both, having a Pro AV segment, a Pro AV show alongside CEDIA Expo, does that make you want to have 2 booths? Does that make you want to enhance your booth? Does this make sense to somebody who does spend money with both organizations?
Yeah, well, it's a really, really great question, and I learned about this yesterday as you did, and I And then, my girl's in the next year's booth selection right now. And she's like, hey, can you be available? I'm like, well, I can't be. But she's like, should we get in the commercial thing? JetBuild is probably 75% commercial, 25% residential, and in terms of our base. And so, being in that commercial area could be beneficial. But to me, it's a dilution, frankly. I'm not really a fan of this idea, only because there is an Infocom. And you mentioned ISE, which is a great example. In Europe, it's a combined show, but it is truly a combined show. It is a gargantuan show that's 100% commercial, 100% residential, and there's everything there. But there's only one show. There's not another show 4 months later that competes with either side, right? On that kind of scale. So I feel this is, they could toss in, consumer electronics, automotive, some gardening, and make it be a bigger show. So frankly, I'm a little critical of it. I love both markets, but I think CEDIA's value comes from the fact that it's the residential market, and the companies that do both sides, they're going to go to both shows. They're not going to do but that being said, that's my critical side. That being said, heck, if I did both sides, this is great. I can also see some of my guys from my commercial manufacturers and vendors. Maybe I can then avoid Infocom, which is a ridiculous notion, but that's why this is confusing and bizarre to me. But JetBuild, we embrace it because there'll be a few more people that'll come that we can serve. So we like it as a JetBuild, but I just don't know for the industry at large how this is going to play out personally.
It'll attract a larger audience, and why not? I would venture to guess that there's a good percentage of those people at CEDIA that also do commercial integration as well, as we just spent the first 10 minutes talking about. So I haven't been, so I can't really speak to that. I've been to Infocom a ton of times, and I know that it's more of a commercial, and CEDIA is supposed to be the residential version of that. But I wouldn't see a problem going to both. Exhibiting at both might be a bit difficult since you guys do both. You might have to be at both, and I know how long those days can be for you guys. But for those of us that just like to, show up there with a little bit of a hangover from the night before, we would like to go to these things.
That would be Fernando. Really quickly, Amala is not a spokesperson. I am not going to ask her for an official line from our friends at Emerald. But we did spend, as Fernando said, the first 10 minutes talking about this crossover. And the one thing I want to point out is there is this market, and I'm not smart enough to know who's going to capitalize on it. But it is the work from wherever market, okay? And at least in the States, and I have been corrected a couple of times, there are parts of Europe that this is similar as well, where if you were a commercial integrator, no pun intended, Amala, if you're a commercial integrator, that's where you go, right? You go to the offices, you go to the big stadiums, you go to the higher education. You're not doing residential, right? And it is an active choice. If somebody calls you, or if you have a client that says, hey, you've done a great job in my boardroom, would you do my house? The answer is, without thinking, no, right? By and large. On the residential side, however, after 2008, they had to find another line because the housing market just tanked, right? And so they started doing hospitality. They started doing restaurants. They started doing what you would consider the smaller jobs that the commercial folks just didn't have time for anymore, weren't interested. They were doing doctor's office, dentist's office, lawyer, so these folks were already having these personal relationships, and then they were branching out by necessity, right? Because nobody else was putting AV in 2008 and 2009. Amala, is there a moment, is there a thing here, is there a market here that some of us just aren't realizing, where you've got this group of residential dealers who are, baked into CEDIA, the organization, that's their certification, but they are reaching out and they are needing more and more commercial gear every single year.
So I don't know if I can speak to whether or not we've had any market research since I don't know that. However, I can say that there is, like, we're filling a market need, for integration-focused trade events, because we're seeing the rise of hybrid workflows and resi-mercial. We have published a lot of articles about resi-mercial applications. We've seen a lot of case studies in that. So we're seeing that market. We're seeing integrators having that peaked interest in that. And so we're filling that market need. And I want to add, like, at the Commercial Integrator Expo, there will be those education sessions, that will provide those agnostic sessions about the resi-mercial spaces that are coming up and coming in these coming years. So that's what I can say.
Tim, you brought up the point. Maybe it's not for these commercial integrators like, well, I'm going to go to that now. But your point about residential integrators that want to explore, maybe they've been dabbling in it. It's a way for them to, without having to go to Orlando or Vegas to InfoComm, while they're already at the Resi show they go to every year, they can explore, they can learn. So for that, I guess I see some good. Then they're going to wind up probably graduating, as it were, and begin going to InfoComm every year, right? I mean, if they're going to get into it on a bigger level, because you're never going to get all of those vendors at this expo. It's just way too big to get all of those vendors. So, but it's an interesting dabble, I suppose, in that regard.
I made the comment to somebody this week at CEDIA Expo, and we were chatting about the home office, right? And this is not to disparage any of the traditional residential manufacturers, but there are certain things that the commercial, let's say, signal processing companies, they just tend to be more robust because they have to be, right? Because they're on 24/7. Absolutely, right. And I think that there's going to come a point in time where those residential dealers that are putting in home offices are going to be asked for those more robust, more enterprise features, and either the residential manufacturers are going to have to come to bat, or suddenly you've got a swath of residential dealers suddenly becoming a dealer for a traditional commercial.
Well, yeah, you'll get the QSDs and the Shores creating these residential devices that are a downscale version of these big devices for home, in the same.
What about the thought that, UC and everything along with it is eating up the AV market, commercial especially. So that might be something, not doing any kind of market research, that might be something that right now every single manufacturer has a UC product. Mm-hmm. So there's this, I don't want to say more excitement, but there's more traffic on that particular vertical. So that might be something that could be bought into that's, the expo there that can spice things up, or maybe there's some things that it's, that might be a thought without really knowing a lot about it.
Alrighty. Last article actually comes from Amala and Commercial Integrator. The diversity transformation has begun. Amala was speaking with a number of folks, DEI consultants, NSCA, talking about putting a DEI focus on the industry. And just so I don't get yelled at by Bradford Ben, DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And as Amala, you say, it's more than just a buzzword. So let's start with you. As an industry, what can we do to focus on this and bring this more to the forefront?
Yeah, so I've always been an advocate for DEI myself, being an international woman. And so coming into the industry, the one thing I did realize, one of my very first articles was about the women in AV, and what I realized from having spoken to such amazing women in the industry is that it's more than just, having panel discussions. It's more than, having that tag of DEI on certain social media posts or in trade show events. And certainly those amplify. But what are they amplifying? They're amplifying the efforts, and that's where we have to really focus on. It's about trying to bring about a change, trying to implement strategies that provide an inclusive environment for everybody in the industry. And this is where the AV industry has been making strides, but there's still lots to be done. And one of the good things about the NSCA DEI Action Council is that they're trying to do this. So they have partnered up with Living HR, which is actually an external agency that has dealt with other companies and other industries, but they're now venturing into the EV industry, and they're providing these resources, and they're providing sessions, they're coming into the workplace, they're conducting surveys and helping companies realize where they stand in terms of diversity and inclusion and how they can help.
Cool. Paul, asking the same question: How do we facilitate kind of the DA? Not kind of. How do we facilitate the DA?
Yeah, this is tough for me. I'm pretty cynical by nature, and I've kind of my first thought is always we need fewer councils and we need more candidates, right? Like we've tried so hard to hire diverse here, but there's never the candidates, right? So these councils and incentives, those resources that they can go out and educate people about our industry. I think we talked about this, maybe even in the a portion of this in the last time I was on, how it's getting the candidates, and we struggle. And I have such a passion for diversity that I've made 2 missteps hiring, once on ethnicity, once on gender, to give a benefit of the doubt. When I believed the better candidate was this basic white dude, as usual, that's, I'm like, I don't need another middle-aged white dude here. I hire on diversity only 2 months later to have it flop because the skill wasn't there, the talent wasn't there. And out of the entire search for the talent, I get 98 white dudes and 2 or 3 diverse candidates, which I desperately wish it could be different. So we try so hard, but the interest, is we need the candidates. I think we need the candidates now, but that could exactly be, and that may be the exact job, right? And it's getting the interest. There's been so many, fantastic people in the industry that have made steps. I mean, you got your Corey Schaefer that have done so much for the women she's a rock star, and just finally moved on. And we have our favorite. We have a woman that's like everybody's favorite top person here at JetBuilt. But maybe I'm the top person, but after me maybe. But point is, not favorite person though, only by job title. But my point is, but we just need the candidates, and it's always sad. And I always set out. We just hired 2 more people this week, and they both wound up being white men again. And it saddens me. And it was a woman that hired them, and she tried her best to get as diverse as we can, but we couldn't get the talent. Now, of course, everybody's having trouble with talent in 2022, right? Across every industry, just talent in general is hard to get, with the job market being so tight, which is so bizarre in the economic climate we're in. But I just hope, and again, I know I'm robbing the floor here, but I just hope we can get talent, we can get candidates, so that we can be more diverse. But it's got to start with the interest from those candidates into the industry.
Yesterday, ironically, there was a report in AV magazine about a trade show in Europe that got caught up in some sort of sexual harassment claim, and they at that point are going to hire a person to facilitate that role, just to make sure. Sometimes people need to be reminded of the fact that we're not living in a Mad Men TV show society, so we really have to be careful. And it's just some sort of, a lot of times, unconscious bias, right? So there's this unconscious bias by some men, and not just white men, but all men in this industry with regards to saying, well, women aren't good in tech. Well, just ask our friend Charmaine, how good is she? She's one of the top people in the industry, and she's a woman. My organization, 9/11 Museum, the outgoing CEO is a woman. The incoming CEO is a woman. In fact, the head of IT is a woman. It sometimes, now the question becomes, when you put a job out, and I've been in that position, when you put a position out in on the internet or wherever, you give it to recruiters, you just get an inundation of male candidates, and I really look through them. They're all typically the same, and I look through them, and I'm looking for a woman in that situation. And sometimes when I look through the resume, unfortunately, it's just not a good fit. And at the end of the day, that's really what it matters. Is that person a good fit? We're not going to try to shoehorn someone into a role that they're just not qualified for because it's just going to be a bad scenario. Our organization, as far as the, Latinos and people of color, our AV team is all people of color, headed up by me. I have 2 Latinos and a black gentleman that works for us. So when I started in the industry 3 decades ago or so, for the most part, in many teams, I was the only person of color. Now that's a totally different story in 2022. The AV industry is for the most part, a ticket to the middle class for a lot of people. And it's a ticket to the middle class in which you do not necessarily need a college degree. And that appeals to a lot of people. And that is something that we need to keep open to everyone. People of color and women have different perspective on certain things, different fresh eyes, fresh thought that we need to take heed of. It's an important thing. Why? It's a reason why Google and Amazon are proponents of the HB1 visa, because it's not only bringing talent from other countries, but it's also bringing diversity of thought, and that is a huge factor that really goes unmentioned in a lot of these scenarios.
I just wanted to add 2 points because both of them come back to the education factor. You're talking about talent pool and you're talking about diversity of thought, and they all come back to the education factor. Now, the AV industry is a bubble. When I joined, I had no idea of what the AV industry is, and most people, everybody that I've spoken to, have that same story, right? They stumbled upon AV, they discovered AV accident, and that's
no one's in this industry on purpose. We're all former DJs, we're all former musicians, we're all people that just stumbled at, oh, wait a minute, what's this AV thing? I can actually make some money doing this. And again, like I said, it's a ticket to the middle class for a lot of us. So you're exactly right.
Exactly. So that's where, when companies take that initiative to reach colleges, to produce programs, not just like hiring, but internship programs or education programs that talk about what the AV industry is about, and you get to the Black colleges. I think there are some companies who are doing that, of getting women in STEM, sponsoring those kind of scholarships. That's when you're going to see that talent pool open up, because you're popping that bubble essentially.
That's where VIXA is very important in this, because it's I wouldn't say their job or responsibility, but just to put the AV,
out there.
Just like, hey, this might be you're tech savvy, wherever you are, young man. This might be a career path for you. And most people, like I mentioned before, are not thinking about AV when you go to an elementary school. Unless the kid's father is an AV professional, they're not looking to AV. It's a place where failed DJs and musicians live. Although some of us are not so failed, but
and sometimes you're failed on both of those. So
yeah.
Thank you guys. That will do it. I good long conversation on this, but I think it's fantastic. Check out Amala's article. Mitchell will put a link to it. So thank you all so much. Amala, thank you, ma'am. How can people connect with you or Commercial Integrator?
You can reach out to me on Twitter or on LinkedIn at my name, Amala Reddie. That's AMALA REDDIE.
All right. Mr. Dexter, thank you, sir. How do people connect with you or JetBuilt?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Paul Dexter, maybe Jet Dexter, I forget, but one or the other. But you search JetBuilt, we're pretty easy to find. You can find me there, jetbuilt.com, JETBUILT.com.
All right. Mr. Mora, thank you, sir. Pleasure to have
you.
Finally
Thanks.
Getting you on. How do people connect with you, sir?
LinkedIn, Fernando Mora. That's all. Don't do the Twitters.
All right, very good. Probably best, honestly. it can suck you in there, dude.
Yeah.
For Tim Albright, do not follow me on the Twitters, but go by the website, AVNation.tv. That's AVNation.tv. You will find this program and a host of others. I mentioned the fact that we just got back from CEDIA Expo, so you can check out all the videos there, probably by the end of this week when this lands, so you can check that out. Also, we will be heading to DSE is our next show, Digital Signage experience there in Vegas in November. So all that and more at avnation.tv. It's avnation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. That's all the time we have for AV Week.